Good morning. So this has been a really good program since yesterday. I introduced the former Army Chief yesterday, and today I get to introduce the former Air Force Chief. I have been bragging about this at home. So continuing with our theme of next generation technology for next generation defense, we have really had some, we really have an interesting battery of speakers here, not just distinguished servicemen, but unsurprisingly, but impressively, also very well versed with technology. So continuing with our impressive battery of speakers, we have with us today Air Chief Marshal VR Chaudhari, PVSM, AVSM, VM, ADC. He was born on 4th September 1962 and commissioned into the fighter stream of the Indian Air Force on 29th December 1982. He was an alumnus of the National Defence Academy. He is an alumnus of the National Defence Academy and the Defence Services Staff College, Wellington. The air officer has flown various types of aircraft and is experienced on MiG-21, MiG-23 MF and MiG-29. He has flown over 3,800 hours and was a member of the Indian Air Force first aerobatic team on the Kiran aircraft. He is a Category A qualified flying officer and an instrument rating instructor and examiner. The Air Chief Marshal has rich and varied flying experience, including several operational missions. During his illustrious career, he has held a number of field and staff appointments. He has been an Air Force examiner on several types of fighter and trainer aircraft. He has commanded a MiG-29 squadron and served as the Chief Operations Officer and Base Commander of frontline bases in Western and Southwestern Air Commands. He has served as an instructor at Defence Services Staff College, Wellington, as well as Defence Services Command and Staff College at Zambia. As Deputy Chief of the Air Staff, the Air Chief Marshal was instrumental in making the capability development plans for the Indian Air Force. He has headed operations of Eastern Air Command as the Senior Air Staff Officer and was Air Officer Commanding-in-Chief of the Western Air Command. He has been the Vice Chief of the Air Staff prior to taking over as the 27th Chief of the Air Staff on 30th September 2021. In recognition for his meritorious services of an exceptionally high order, he was awarded the Vayu Sena Medal in January 2004, Ati Vishishta Seva Medal in January 2015, and Param Vishishta Seva Medal in January 21. The Air Chief Marshal was appointed as Principal Honorary ADC to the President of India on 30th September 2021. The Air Chief Marshal is married to Mrs. Neeta Chaudhari and they are blessed with 2 sons. So with this, I would like to invite Air Chief Marshal Chaudhari to take the stage.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you very much for the kind words and warm welcome to the Director. It's indeed a pleasure to be here among in the country's topmost academic institution, and I'm very happy to note the initiatives that are being taken to foster the cooperation between the academia and the industry and the defense services. I know you have a battery of speakers following me who are going to speak on the technology challenges and the requirements of the armed forces in the coming decades. I will not labor on very many of those points which will become repetitive, but what I plan to do today is to take you through what is happening actually in the so-called battlefields of the world. What is happening, what are the changes that are foreseen, what are the requirements of technology that are foreseen by the armed forces, the Air Force in particular, and that is where what is the role of the academia and where you all can come in and where the industry can also chip in to make us Atmanirbhar in this critical area. So let me start by taking you through what exactly is happening across the globe, what do we mean by the character of warfare, how are things changing, how are the technology being infused in all this, and so on. So let me start with what is called the character of war. It simply means, it is the means by which a war is fought. If you have read some old stories of the battles of within India, maybe even the Maratha Empire or the famous kingdoms of India, so many battles, you see what are the means of war fighting that were employed. It was hand-to-hand fighting, sword to sword, bows and arrows and so on. Slowly we moved on to what is called trench warfare in the First World War, where the defenses were held by digging deep trenches and taking on the enemy as soon as he popped up somewhere. With the mechanization, with the coming in of the tanks, with the artillery, with the gunpowder and so on, the character changed even further. In the early 20th century, the advent of aviation and aircraft brought in a new dimension to warfare. Similarly, the use of software in most of our systems today has brought in a complete revolution in what is in the character of warfare. The technology, of course, has been the primary influencer in all this, in how the warfare is changing, and you'll agree that sometimes some changes take very, very long time to take place. Sometimes they happen very rapidly. There was one famous, the head of the US Patents Division, back in 1890 or somewhere there, he had made a famous statement. He says, everything that needs to be invented has already been invented. So he was actually planning to shut down the patents office at that time. But then you see how things changed rapidly in the next few years. Okay, and now the famous Moore's law, you're all aware of how the hyper evolution is taking place in digital technologies. So all this is really affecting the way any kind of conflict is going to be held in future. In the last 3 decades, what is more important is the conversion of these technologies. Miniaturization to for example, in aviation world, we always looked at the aircraft, the fighter aircraft, the bomber aircraft as the primary means of carrying out any offensive action. Today that is shifting to missiles, to drones, to unmanned systems and so on. So sometimes this change has taken many years to take place, sometimes it has happened very rapidly. And the other last important thing is that earlier warfare meant violence only. That means the victory was decided upon by by statistics as to how many people have been killed, how many people have been have laid down their lives for your country and so on. Today that may not be so. Today in any conflict, in a future conflict, what we foresee, for example, with our immediate northern neighbor China, the non-kinetic means the information warfare is going to be primary. The cyber warfare, the space warfare is going to be primary. The violence or the actual kinetic warfare may come much later. In fact, you may not even come to know when a war has begun, because these cyber attacks, these attacks on your space assets and information warfare will take place so silently that you will come to know only when the 3rd or 4th level effects start showing themselves up. So with this kind of a change in the character of warfare, a lot of things are happening today. Firstly, what we call compression of relative time. In the past, some of you would have read in the 90s, there were a lot of conflicts going on across the globe. After the Gulf War, there was a war in Kosovo, in the Balkan states, there was in Yemen, all this place, but we never came to know about it. It didn't affect us. Today, one ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, the entire economy of this side of the world is affected. Okay, the Houthis carried out 1-2 attacks in the Suez Canal area. The ships have to now take the longer route across the Cape of Good Hope. It is going to, affect the economy of so many countries this side. So the pace of change, of course, is changing very rapidly. Global interconnectivity is also making us more aware of what is happening. And most important, and this is a point which I will keep dwelling on in the next 20-25 minutes, is what is the center of gravity and how information is now the center of gravity. So, to take you through this, I will explain one thing, what is called, there was one Colonel John Warden of the United States Air Force. He had propounded a theory, it is called the Warden's 5-ring theory. So he said, if you look at any enemy, if you want to conduct a conflict, a war, you have to look at the enemy as a system of 5 rings. In the center of gravity, is the leadership. It is surrounded by the organic essentials, infrastructure, population, and the outermost shell is the fielded military. To be able to win a conflict, you have to hit the leadership. So at that time, the thought process till the end of Second World War, even Vietnam, was you do what was called an onion peeling. You peel off one layer at a time. You hit the fielded military, then you hit the infrastructure, then you hit everything, and finally you come to the center of gravity. But during the first Gulf War, what John Warden proposed was that the air power, the Air Force, and the use of long-range weapons can hit all 5 layers simultaneously. So you don't have to do onion peeling, you can attack all of them at your will. But at that time, so the Gulf War was prosecuted with this theory in mind. The entire planning for the first Gulf War was based on Warden's 5-ring theory. Now, based on this, at that time, what was the center of gravity? Was Saddam Hussein, the Republican Guards. Okay. Today, is it applicable? Not so. What is the center of gravity today? Is breaking the link between political and military leadership, or discrediting leadership by information warfare. This is what now we find most of the adversaries are doing now. They tend to discredit our leadership. They want to create disharmony within the nation. So that is the center of gravity which they are attacking. Okay. Earlier, during the Gulf War, the second layer was the organic essentials, that is the electrical grids, fuel, refineries, and so on. Today, what is it? It is internet connectivity. You disrupt the supply chain, disrupt logistics, the sea lanes of communication, you will achieve your aim. The next layer was the physical destruction of roads, railways, bridges. So you cut off his ability to sustain the war. You cut off his fuel supplies, you hit his ports, you hit his railway yards, and so on. Today, more important is, we see this happening in Russia and Ukraine conflict today. Ukraine has carried out multiple attacks on Russian infrastructure, but they have not been able to stop the offensive action by the Russians. Because unless you are able to completely neutralize all the fuel supply, let's say, you will never achieve your aim. Here one nice example is during the Second World War, the Allies were wondering how to stop the offensive, the blitzkrieg of the Germans. So after deep analysis, they realized that what is like they say that story, the horseshoe is, or the nail in the horseshoe is the most important element of the war. So they realized that the ball bearings were the most important element on which the entire German armed forces were moving. Whether it was tanks, ships, aeroplanes, cars, anything. So they said, if we hit the ball bearing factories, we will bring the Germans to a halt. So multiple attacks were carried out on the Dresden and Munich ball bearing factories to stop production of ball bearings. So that was the strategic thought at that time. Today, will that be applicable? I don't think so. Today you attack the critical information infrastructure, you deny services, denial of services, that will cause more crippling effect than hitting any industry. Similarly, physical destruction of cities, bombing of cities, urban areas was prevalent right up to the last 2 decades or so. Today it is now, you will cripple the population if you hit the financial system. Today if the UPI system is hit in our country, the banking system is hit, it will cause more destruction probably than physical destruction of any city. Right? And lastly, of course, is earlier in the Gulf War and that time, the outer layer of all this 5th ring was the armored columns, artillery, guns, aircraft, ships, etc. So the war was to destroy these items, physical destruction of these elements. Now, I think the more important is to physically destroy networks, softwares, satellites through whatever cyber attacks, EW attacks, and so on. Okay. So I'm leading you to now what are the compulsions, what are the requirements for the future, where we should focus our energies on. Okay. Information domain, like I said, is the new center of gravity. It goes without saying. You look at the statistics which I just picked up from the net. By end of this year, the global data sphere will exceed 175 zettabytes. Okay. So this is the center of gravity. And weaponization of human heuristics is enabling manipulation of the cognitive airspace. By continuously bombarding you with information through social media, through any other means, your mind is changing. The way you look at an adversary is changing. Somebody is 12 feet tall. Somebody who is actually 6 feet tall, you make him feel very diminutive by information warfare. You are changing the cognitive mind space. Okay, but that is not the reality. The reality is that you should be aware of this and prevent yourself from such attacks. So the future battlefield will look at the three elements. The hardware, of course, goes without saying. New technologies keep coming in. More important now is the software and concepts which are based on the available software and what we need to think about for the future. One example I'll give you is the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. Typically in the for us in the Air Force also, we do what we call target mapping and targeting planning. So we look at every target. We say, okay, if this is a target, which is the best way to attack it? Which is the best direction to attack? What weapon to use? What caliber of weapon to use? So how much of destructive power is required to neutralize one element? It takes many hours and hours of work, of study, to analyze images, to analyze everything else, carry out analysis of the civil engineering structures and so on, to decide what is the weapon to target matching that is required. Typically, they say that it takes around 24 to 28 hours to actually home on to about 5 to 6 targets. That much of work is required. After the the Israel-Hamas conflict started, the Israelis have started using a software called Gospel, an AI-based module. With Gospel, now they are able to do about 100 targets in every 1 hour. That is entire mapping of the entire target, all information about it. 100 targets per hour is the capability. This is what we want to achieve. This is where we need to be. We cannot continue with the old, archaic way of going about targeting. So the implications are that increasing availability of advanced technologies is changing the complete character of warfare. Here, of course, we have to be careful that there is a heightened risk of miscalculation and escalation, particularly with autonomous systems. We keep hearing about so much of drone warfare and how drones are the future and so on. But what we have to remember, a drone finally is going to be an autonomous system. There are issues of ethics, morality, there is, miscalculation, something can happen, it can go wrong, it can hit something else and, it might escalate into a conflict which you never imagined. So this is something that we have to be very careful about. So what are in our area, how does the threat manifest itself? Firstly, what we look at is the wide spectrum of threats, starting from the non-conventional, sub-conventional, conventional warfare and so on. We also have a problem of, with our hostile borders and neighbors, we can have conflicts which can be, what we call two-front. There can be a two-front engagement, there can be collusion between, let's say, the western and northern adversaries, there can be so many other, possibilities, permutations, combinations for which we have to be continuously prepared for. So here what we understand is that it is always a superior power which can control the escalation. An inferior power can never decide, okay, let's stop the war today. Okay, you have to have superiority to be able to say, okay, Khamba, let's finish here, right? So to be able to control the escalation matrix, either you have better hardware, more numbers, or you have better technologies. Okay, so what I would like to focus on is that while the numbers will keep taking time to build up, the absorption of technology can happen rapidly and the asymmetry can be attained very rapidly, where we will be in a position to control the escalation of any conflict. Okay. And of course, what I put here is a tactical action can have strategic ramifications. Here a small act somewhere, a small attack somewhere can be blown out of proportion and get into multinational conflicts. Okay, here I want to introduce you to one more term for some of you who may not be familiar with this. There was another United States Air Force colonel called John Boyd. The first one was John Warden, this is John Boyd. So he coined what is called the OODA cycle, the OODA loop. That is observe, orient, decide and act. When I say observe means gather all information. Orient is to analyze that information. Based on that analysis, you take a decision what is to be done and then finally act on the information that is available. So what he had said is that you should have a very short OODA loop. From the time you observe something till you act, it should be shorter than the enemy's OODA loop. The idea is to keep the enemy in the OO phase, that is observe and orient, don't let him take a decision. Because if you allow him to take a decision, you are shortening his UDA cycle, which is not good. So, aim is to reduce your UDA cycle by quickly assimilating all the information that you can, using AI modules if required to help in the decision support, and continue this cycle so that you are remaining well ahead of the adversary. While at the same time, how do you deny the enemy? How do you interfere with him? Is by electronic warfare, cyber attacks, attacking his DDoS attacks and so on, to keep him only guessing as to what is going to happen, to break down his communication and so on. So, here is where again seamless integration of all the technological capabilities will help you to keep the enemy's OODA loop never ending. So, in the military industry today, what are the primary factors that are affecting? Are, of course, these are known to all of us. The internal security landscape is constantly changing. The proliferation of unmanned systems and drones is taking place. We are still continuing to battle the counterinsurgency, counter-terrorism in the heart of the country, also along our western borders. Cyber and space warfare is going to take the center stage, like I mentioned. So, the challenges for the military industry is, of course, the rising cost of defense equipment. The more the cost, the more will be the public scrutiny. The more likely that you go in for some system which may not be as good as you thought it will be when you induct it. It will go through a lot of observations from audit. So, the people who are in the business of now carrying out the planning, the procurement, etc., will be a little hesitant to go on to a new technology, because they said, I got burnt my fingers last time, maybe I'll not try the same attempt. So, a very conservative attitude starts setting in among the armed forces. So, this is where a breakthrough is required, where some technologies can actually prove that the money's worth has been given. The geopolitical shifts, again, we have seen how even conflicts and sanctions can affect the tilt towards nations. McDonald's, for example, stopped their supplies in Russia as soon as the conflict began, probably for the better of the Russian health. But notwithstanding, everything can be weaponized. The oil is weaponized, the food is weaponized, everything is weaponized. So once again, in our scenario, what is happening? We have to be continuously focused on a two-front scenario in a very hostile and a very volatile neighborhood. So things can erupt anytime. We are always walking on a tightrope. Things can go wrong, can go awry anytime. We have a lot of active non-state actors. The terrorism activities still continue. The climate change effect of cross-border influx, we've seen what is happening in Bangladesh now. There is, we can expect some cross-border influx. How it is going to affect the demography, how it is going to affect the entire, the psyche of people around that is something that we need to see. International cooperation compulsions, once again, the ITA regulations, for example, or the sanctions that can be slapped upon by the US or any other country, it can happen overnight. So you could be just at the fag end of developing something when critical technology is denied to you through sanctions. So these are the situations under which we have to continue working. Under this, for the Indian Air Force in particular and the armed forces in general, what I look at is the 4 pillars that we need to keep our focus on. Firstly is, of course, capability development, assimilating technology, having clear doctrines and policies, and training for all this. So coming to the capability development, it goes without saying that this is the most important pillar of our transformation. Here, in the past, what we always looked at, capability was based upon the numbers game, as we call it, the bean count. Somebody has got so much, so we should have so much. Unless I have 2:1 ratio, I cannot defeat him, and so on. So our capability was always based on what is the threat and what is the demand. So we say do a threat-based and demanded capability. From here, we now, in future, we need to stop looking at this. We look at what is just the capability demanded. If I need to neutralize, the example is the Russian on 24th of February, almost 3 years ago, in 22, they almost had rolled in their tanks into the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. But they were halted a few kilometers, 30 kilometers outside Kyiv. They were halted by what? It was not a tank-to-tank battle. It was not an aircraft against tank battle. It was a group of 30 or 40 volunteers, civilians, mind you, not men, women in uniform, civilians who formed a group. They called it the Aerozovitska. This is a group which used the cyber capabilities and the drones to carry out an attack on the logistics chain and on a physical attack on the lead elements of the tanks. They knew which were the narrow profiles from which the tanks had to pass. So hit those few tanks and everybody behind is stuck. So it was not mass against mass. It was a capability that was demanded at that time. So this is what we need to look at. What is the capability? How do we get it without looking at the old traditional means of, bin counts or mass against mass. So here, induction of new technologies is very important, and we need to restructure our existing resources also. We need to identify the future risks and constraints. This goes without saying. What we are doing in the Indian Air Force, it was a four-pronged approach, the ABCD as I used to call it. A for acquisition, of course we keep acquiring newer technologies, newer equipment, newer hardware. B for boost, the existing equipment, that is you keep upgrading it, till it reaches a point of saturation where you can't upgrade it anymore. Thereafter then you keep conserving it, sustaining that same equipment. And finally, of course, you pitch in the design and development. Here is where this initiative by IIT Mumbai is great, that we are a part of the design and development process right from beginning, from what we call the TRL level 1, 2, 3 onwards. So the armed forces are involved deeply right from stage 1 here. So what is happening across in the Air Force? We had started a thing called the Meher Baba competition for swarm drones. So this was something like a Shark Tank event. We gave it was an open invitation to all the academia, small industries, and so on to take part in this competition. And based on this competition, it gave rise to numerous startups and opportunities for people to invest in swarm drones. Similarly, the Air Force is doing a lot of projects under the Make 1, 2, 3 technology demonstration and so on, defense space challenges. We also have what is called the base repair depots in the Indian Air Force. Each of them have set up a nodal technology center, which is now interacting closely with the industry and academia. And in the recent past, we have opened the doors of all these BRDs to everybody, to the academia, to industry. So please come and take a look as to what is happening in there, where you can pitch in, and how the mutual cooperation can take place. Okay, one or two small examples I want to give you about what are the areas where we can actually pitch in here. One example is the air traffic. For example, in the last 20-25 years, the air traffic has gone up over 5 times across the country. Approximately 10,000 civil military flights are either taking off or landing or transiting over our country. And one of the primary roles of the Indian Air Force is to identify each one of them. So we need to identify and tag every aeroplane and give it what is called an air defense clearance number. So this is one of the primary roles of the Air Force, where we have setups which are working around the clock, manned by hundreds of people who are doing this task. Now the rate of traffic as of now is about 4 aircraft per second across the country, likely to increase to 7 aircraft per second in the next 5 to 6 years only. So here is where what we have to look at is how do we automate the entire process. Okay, how do we reduce the human in loop here? How do we help in AI-based decision-making modules? Because if some aircraft does not identify himself or itself, then it is treated as a rogue aircraft, as in, could be an hijacked aircraft. So here is where decision-making modules need to come in. The number of airports has gone up more than 4 times in the last 20 years, again likely to double in the next 10 years or so. So just as an example, this is one area where we can really put our minds together as to how to make this entire process absolutely seamless. From the time you identify to an aircraft, till you give it a number, till it leaves your air defense identification zone and so on. Here again, more important is how do we protect this entire automation system, cyber protection, what are the redundancies required. You will have to have multiple backups, because if everything is based on automation, then the redundancy comes in here. How do you utilize the space-based assets to carry out communication and so on. The other example I want to give is on the communication networks. Today we look at the 3 layers of communication: the terrestrial networks, the airborne networks and the space networks. Terrestrially, our networks are quite robust with fiber optic cables across the country. There is adequate redundancy. However, here we need to have a lot of security operation centers and so on. What we are graduating on to now is the airborne networks, aircraft to aircraft, aeroplane to airplane, or to communication through software defined radios. Now this is a field where we need a lot of impetus from the academia and the Indian industry. We are lagging behind tremendously in software defined radios, which will help us to seamlessly transfer data from airborne platform to platform and so on. And the third network is of course the space network. Finally, we will require integration of all these 3 networks with adequate security backups, redundancies and so on. This is a key area. Like I said, if you go back to what I said, if information is the new center of gravity, then your communication is as vital as the information itself. Okay. Assimilation of technology, like I mentioned, the asymmetrical impact it had. Conventional defenses may start becoming obsolete slowly. So there will be new pressure points based on where the technology is being utilized to its fullest. The hyper evolution of technology and in new areas, like for example in hypersonics or directed energy weapons and so on, is taking place really rapidly. We should not get left behind here. The autonomy, of course, I mentioned here that they are fast adaptable, but they are also fraught with the danger of the ethics and morality of use. Here the omni-use or dual-use equipment, for example, and also the training. If you look at what is happening in the Middle East today, the Houthis, who are operating from diverse locations in Yemen and other parts of that the geography there, are able to carry out relentless attacks on the United States Navy, the biggest, most powerful navy in the world. Okay. Why is this happening? The dual-use technology is making it easy for them to adapt something which was meant for civilian use for a military purpose. Secondly, lack of training. Typically in the Indian Armed Forces, for example, to become a drone operator or to become an operator of a shoulder-fired missile, it requires 4 to 6 weeks of training. We have academic training, we go through on-the-job training, practical training and so on. So it requires 4 to 6 weeks to train somebody to fire a shoulder-fired missile, let's say, or to be, to give a stamp that he is a qualified drone operator. None of these people, the Houthis, have got any of these qualifications. They have not gone through any academic lessons. They do not know any technical data of that system, but they are using it. So what we need to do is find ways how we can reduce our own training times, our own, making use of this, capitalize on these technologies to reduce our training cycles, to make more people proficient in using this equipment. Okay, we cannot have typical what we have in the armed forces, what we had a trade structure, that so and so is an, he is a missile operator, so he will do only missile operation. Today we have to now diversify, because the cost of training is coming down. The omni-use and dual-use equipment are available. So this is something that we need to focus on. Next, of course, doctrines and policy. This is something, like I said, we need to keep abreast with the continuously changing technology, global order. The Indian Air Force has kept on revising its doctrine to stay in touch with the technological changes. Here, once again, what the doctrine recommends is to exploit civil-military fusion to its fullest, both in space exploitation as well as in technology induction. Lastly is of course realistic training. Here I just cover 2 or 3 issues. One is to disrupt the training patterns. Like I just mentioned, we cannot continue having long pedantic talks and lectures and classes for every single system that gets inducted. We need to find shortcuts. We need to disrupt the way we go about it. For example, some of you would be aware, at least in our generation, people had to learn typing, QWERTY keyboards. So you enroll in a typing class to learn what is a QWERTY keyboard. Okay, today you don't even have to teach a 3-year-old kid what is a QWERTY keyboard, right? So we need to evolve the way we train, the way we adapt quickly to the newer systems. Intelligent classrooms, of course, and here once again where technology and where you all can pitch in is simulations. Okay, whether it is pure AR, VR simulators or carrying out large-scale wargaming exercises and so on, we require huge amount of simulation which needs to be dynamic. It needs to constantly change with newer technologies. Okay, here once again, typically what happens in the armed forces is we built a simulator for a wargaming simulator. We are running it for 2 to 3 years, but by the end of 3rd year, the technologies that we are simulating in that have already gone obsolete. So we are always playing catch up. What we need to do is be ahead of the curve to be able to design simulators for the future also. So here, just to summarize, what are the opportunities based on what I have just told you? These are the points that come up: cyber security, AI, big data. The armed forces are one of the biggest generators of data. Humongous amount of data is generated. We need to capitalize on this to create AI systems that can, help us on our decision making here. Space-based defense, not just defense of our space assets. Defense from space. Hypersonic weapons. Today there is no reliable means of defending against an hypersonic attack, a weapon attack. So we have 2 ends of the spectrum. We have the DJ-90 drones which fly at 10 kilometers per hour, and we have the hypersonic weapons which are flying at more than 5 times the speed of sound. We do not have an air defense system that can counter both these threats. So this is something that we need to keep thinking about in the future. What do we do? What kind of shields do we require? Directed energy weapons. The Israel-Hamas conflict statistics have shown that for every rocket fired by Hamas, the rocket costs $5,000. Israel has fired a missile worth $50,000 to hit it. Okay. Can we afford to do it in a prolonged war? The Israel-Hamas conflict is more than a year old today. The Russia-Ukraine is going on for 3 years. Can we afford it? So what do we need something new. We need directed energy weapons maybe. Okay. Internet of military things, once again coming to the same. Blockchain, having immersive technologies, robotics, autonomous systems. The list is endless. Here it is where the open mind is required to be able to foresee what is required for the armed forces, and a closer interaction like in such fora here will help you achieve this. Okay, I'll skip to this. I think we are running behind time. The last point I want to cover is what the director just mentioned, is to change from the science of technology to the engineering of technology, right? So that is where the gap still remains. This, what is called the valley of death in the TRL stages between TRL 4 to 5 is where the weak area is today. So much more hand-holding is required here of the MSMEs, of the industries, who can carry forward the research and development to production and engineering thereafter. So once again, the gaps between the user requirements and the user involvement needs to be bridged, and I'm happy that you have taken a good initiative in this. The last point, of course, is Atmanirbharta. It goes without saying that we cannot fight any conflict with somebody's weapons. Amply evident in Ukraine, they were very happy that initially when the war started, the entire Western world said, we will support you, go forward, we will support you. And you see how it is happening now, and you see the way things have changed after Trump has taken over. Okay, so you cannot fight a war based on imported or borrowed weapons. Unfortunately, we still have the stigma of being one of the largest importers in the world of weapons. So this is something that we need to really, get out of this import. Once again, in my, about 42 years that I served in the Indian Air Force, we've gone through this yo-yo syndrome. People tell us that wars are going to be long drawn, so you have to be prepared for a very long war. So your logistics support system, your training, everything was based on long wars because, the 70s, the world was recovering from Vietnam War, which had carried on for many years. And, before that were the world wars and so on. Then suddenly people said, no, wars are going to be short and swift. So we started training for 5-day war, 10-day war, chatpat things will get over. Okay. So this cycle has continued. We've seen now what is happening. The Syrian conflict started in 2012, it has just got over. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is still ongoing. So you need to be prepared for a long drawn conflict as a nation. So here is where we need capacity and capability, surge capacity also. The impetus by the national leadership is there on domestic manufacturing. It will boost economy and primarily achieving Atmanirbharta is an whole of a nation approach. It cannot be achieved just by one or two diverse factors or speaking about it like this. It actually needs putting the minds together of the entire nation. So the last is the future. We need to focus on indigenous manufacturing, spending on R&D, space assets and applications need to be enhanced. The technologies were clearly brought out by the director in his opening remarks. And finally, invest in niche technologies like I mentioned, hypersonics, directed energy weapons and whatever else. Okay. So finally, what I want to say is that as long as there remain a substantial period between the inception of a weapon system and development, the very latest weapons are out of date in terms of what technology can deliver. So we need to remain constantly ahead of the curve. So thank you very much for your patient hearing, and I wish you all the best. And I hope that some of the takeaways here can be implemented in thinking about what we do in the future. So thank you very much. If there are any questions, do I have the time?